Welcome to Your Schools on Community 7 Television. I'm Shoots Veis and I'm your host. Each month we look at a different aspect of what's going on in Billings Public Schools. And this month we're very excited to have Kevin Croff with us. Kevin works with the Aware Grant program here in Billings Public Schools. So Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Hope it's informative.
Oh, it's going to be informative. Sure, we all know that. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the Aware Grant, let's talk a little bit about you. Give us some background, some history. Did you grow up in the area? Did you come to the area? Give us some background.
I'm a Billings kid. My dad actually got his first principal job here in Billings, Montana at Poly Drive Elementary. And I had some influential teachers and decided to go into education and attended Eastern Montana College. Shows my age a little bit.
That always, when I have a guest that always says that dates them a little bit. So,
yeah, which is okay. I've even got an EMC alumni shirt.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
And got a teaching degree and taught in the district, and then ran a federal technology grant for the district, and then became an administrator. And then just last year I retired as a principal and started teaching at Rocky Mountain College. But Kim Anthony, our curriculum director, asked if I'd assist with this grant that we got through the state.
Yeah. And so what was it about education that you decided this is a field I want to get into, and this is something I want to do for my career?
My dad was a principal. My brother was a principal. He's 15 years older than me, so I saw him go through that process. My mom worked in the schools. Like I said, I had some really influential teachers, and saw the power of education. It's something that I'm a relationship guy, and I know that teaching's about that, and I liked working with people and kids, and so it seemed like a good fit.
Sure. So what were some of your teaching positions? Talk to us about some of the classes you had and what you were teaching.
I taught sixth grade. It was elementary, so I was an elementary guy. I taught at Beartooth, and I taught at Central Heights, and then that federal technology grant, which same design as what we're doing with this behavioral grant.
Sure, yeah.
And then as that grant faded out, I'd been working on my master's degree, and I was a principal at Meadowlark Elementary School and Poly Drive Elementary School, and then finished my career at Bitterroot.
Sure. Give us some compare and contrast on what it was like to be a classroom teacher and what it was like to be a principal. What did you like about being a teacher? What did you dislike about being a teacher? What did you like about being a principal? What did you dislike about being a principal?
There really wasn't anything about teaching that I didn't like. Lesson planning is never anybody's favorite, but it's a necessity. But having those kids to work with all the time and the impact that you have on them, it's pretty incredible. It's a powerful position. I'm a relationship guy, as I said, and I thought I could be more impactful on a broader scale as an administrator. Plus, I had some history with my brother and my dad, so I knew what that path was like. And the awesome part is you get a school of hundreds of kids and staff members and families, and you get to work with all of them every single year, and they truly become your kids, and you really understand the depth of the position. I never anticipated the stress of that type of position when you're dealing with behaviors and money and people that are upset, and in some situations, unfortunately, teachers that were not meant to be teachers, and that's stressful.
Yeah.
But all in all, a great career.
Sure. Were you able then to, given some of those stressful things and things that you went through, were you able to lean on your dad or your brother and call him up and say, man, Shoots, that kid, could wring his neck, and it doesn't matter what I do, I can't get through to that kid? And what did you do in situations like that? Were they able to help you through some of that stuff?
Yeah, some of it. But again, my brother's 15 years older than me. My dad just turned 92, and they were good sounding boards for me, but it's hard for them to relate sometimes, especially my dad. He retired in the 90s, and when I remember calling him up saying, hey, we had active shooter training today, and he said, what's that? A long time ago. So things have changed considerably, and this grant kind of recognizes that a little bit. Education is not the same as it used to be.
Sure. Yeah. All right, well, let's move into the Aware Grant. Like you said, You kind of got recruited. Well, let's go back a little bit. Give us a little bit of history on the grant. How did it apply for it? Why did Billings Public Schools want to apply for this particular grant? And then we'll move into a little bit more of the particulars. But if you can give us a little history on the grant, that would be fantastic.
Sure. It's a federal grant, a SAMHSA federal grant. Then the state coordinates it, and AWARE is the state's title for it. And it's been going on. There was a previous section of it that 3 schools were involved in for 5 years, and this is the second round of the grant, and Billings applied the first time, just didn't have the right stuff, and tweaked it a little bit. And since we're the biggest district in the state, I think that the state had some interest in involving us. And as I said, schools have changed, kiddos have changed, and as an administrator, seeing the dynamics in the classroom and the difficulty that behaviors often bring into it, and students' ability to self-regulate, it's getting a lot trickier. And so we recognize that learning time's being pulled away, and we need to focus on this and focus on health and wellness of kiddos and make sure that staff are being supported, and the academics will come after we get the behavioral component taken care of.
I think you've given us a good overview, but maybe is there anything else from a 30,000-foot level on the overview issue? Are there certain, like maybe 3 goals of the grant, or 3 outcomes that they're looking for? What are kind of maybe some of the broad specifics? I don't know, that's probably an oxymoron, but what are some of the broad specifics of what the grant is trying to accomplish?
So this grant is based off of a MTSS system. They call it multi-tiered systems of support, and generally it's viewed graphically as a triangle, and there are 3 tiers: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And in tier 1, we're dealing with, in an average demographic, it would be 80 to 85% of the kids, and 80 to 85% of whatever we do works for those kids. For example, in this particular grant, we know that there are some foundational skills that kids need for social emotional wellness, and so the PACS Good Behavior game was implemented in the district. And every teacher, K-5, should be implementing some components of PACS Good Behavior game that have some foundational components to it. Zones of regulation is another component that we're going to bring in that teaches kids to self-regulate. In our middle schools, there's something called Signs of Suicide, SOS. Every single 6th grader will get a screening on that. So there are these tier 1 pieces, teams in schools, that every single school should be running this for all of the kids. And then in tier 2, these are kids that may need a little bit of extra support. So maybe there's a check and connect system that they set up. Maybe there's a social emotional group that they work with, perhaps a little bit more time with a counselor, something like that. And then tier 3, those are our kids of greatest concern. And a lot of times tier 3 includes special education. So a kid whose behavior is so significant, it's impacting their academics as well. So we're looking at implementing those components within the districts, and also so we have some uniformity. We've got a broad range of data collection systems, for example. We have a broad range of school-wide behavior systems in place, and so we just want to systematically make sure we're covering everything. Everybody's getting the good stuff, and we have a common vocabulary across the district when we speak to these particular items.
What was before the grant was given to the city of Billings, or the school districts, Billings Public Schools? What was the baseline for what Billings Public Schools was doing along these lines in the schools already? What kind of programs were already in place that the grant can then build upon? So what was here already before the grant ever even started?
So the state providing PACS Good Behavior game training to almost every elementary teacher, so that was in place, but needs a little, refreshing and supplementation, that kind of stuff. Some schools were doing zones of regulation. Some schools were trying different types of behavior plans for kiddos. Some schools had some teams in place. Most elementary schools had a common matrix of behavioral expectations. this will help us really key in and become systematic, so we're all speaking the same language. And regardless if you go to Ponderosa or Poly Drive or Arrowhead or Bench, a kid can even go from one school to another school, and there will be common vocabulary behind that. So we're bringing all the good stuff together and sharing amongst the whole districts.
All right. And so then what does the grant add on to what was already out there? What programs can you expand upon? What staff can you expand upon? What are the things that the grant will allow you to expand upon?
I think our most important component is staffing. So I take a very small portion of the grant. It's a part-time piece for me, but being able to work with the administrators, having been one, and look out from an administrative level. Emily Burkhart was a tremendous find. She's working with the United Way, and she is spectacular at coordinating the grant. And then today we met for the first time with our behavioral coaches. We're going to call them social emotional learning coaches. And they will be a key component to this. They'll go out to all of our schools, K-8, and work with staff and model different pieces, help put different components in place, provide training, help work with kiddos, and then work with the teams built within the schools on problem solving for those kids.
Okay.
On top of that, we also are in collaboration with Riverstone. The grant pays for a mental health specialist that they will hire, the grant will pay for, and that will work in collaboration with us to help make some of those community connections. So we find a lot of times we don't have great connections with the medical community, and there are some of these kiddos that need a medical model to really assist them. So those come together, and reaching out to the community and making that community component is going to be a big part of it as well.
So let's step into that classroom and put your teacher hat on. What kind of behaviors are we trying to address here that cause disruption in the classroom or cause learning not to be happening in the classroom? Talk to us a little bit about what is trying to be addressed with all of the things that you've described to us that's going on out there.
We see kids coming into school that struggle with self-regulation skills. If you've got a kiddo that has been at home, doesn't have any siblings, has not had preschool, has a tablet, and a way of self-regulating is you get on the tablet and you play games, and if mom or dad takes it away and you throw a fit and you get the tablet back, when you transition into kindergarten and we use a tablet to learn letter sounds, for example, and it's time to put that up and do math, and they throw a fit and the tablet's still taken away, and then they throw a desk, that becomes an issue. Their inability to regulate themselves really is a task. They need to learn how to do school, and so we see a lot of these primary kids like that. On top of that, we know in this community, I had a friend that worked for CASA, and he said all the court-appointed specialists for student advocates that he worked with, every single one of the kids that he worked with, meth was a part of that family's background. And so we have kids that come from troubling backgrounds, and we have kids that have been exposed to a lot of trauma in their lives. And we know now through research that we have to address those concerns first. We have to make sure these kids feel safe, feel good about themselves, know that they're supported and loved in the schools. And so we really focus on that component. So as a kindergarten teacher, you're not dealing with one kid, you're dealing with up to 20 kiddos. And if you've got multiple kids that have trauma and self-regulation problems, you need some support. And so that's part of this grant, is coming in, providing some training for that. Some of those kiddos that are in the most need for support, we're looking at a possible kinder booster class where they can be in a specialized classroom, learn some of those self-regulation skills, and then go back in. And we know through some data that we've collected through some different schools that once we get these kids and we teach them some self-regulation skills and we get some supports in place, it works. And then as they become 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, we need to have less of those supports. But that early intervention is a gigantic component of it.
Sure. And then how are you working with those classroom teachers? I know you're providing them with that baseline information, right? Here's some of the things you can do. Now, when they come back to you and say, hey, I did work on A, B, and C, and with kiddo, it's just not enough. Kind of how does that escalate, and how do you bring help to that? Hey, I've tried with kiddo A and it's not working. I need more help. What does that look like?
There is not a teacher in Billings Public Schools that's not working their rear off. They are doing the best that they can. There's no question about that. But sometimes they may not know all the tricks, and there may not be system supports within the school necessarily that are locked into place. So again, that's going to be our first component. We're looking at Tier 1. So in general, as a school, we know that we are taking care of all the Tier 1 pieces, and sometimes those supports prevents that escalation piece.
Sure.
So we look at that. The coaches will be a gigantic part of that as well. So a coach can go into a classroom, observe, and maybe recognize, as another set of eyes, maybe this is a trigger for a kiddo, or have you tried this particular type of positive reinforcement plan, or this kid really excels in reading. Here's some strategies we might do to really complement that a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and then they can also model some of the different strategies that we're looking at and provide that type of support. We know ultimately that's not going to work for every kid.
Right.
And so that connection with Riverstone, with the mental health specialist, she'll be able to evaluate, or he will be able to evaluate the student, have a conversation with the parents. They'll have someone that will also help coordinate. So being able to help parents set up appointments, send reminders to parents about the appointments, make some connections with therapists and doctors, and if a medical model is needed, then that's something that
Sure.
they can follow up with.
Yeah, all right. I want you to put your administrator hat on a little bit here, being responsible for that whole building. What do you see as the benefits of the grant program on a whole building perspective? Not just in that one classroom where we have this one kid who's having trouble, but on building wide. What do you see the benefits of the program that way?
Yeah, well, personal story. My last year at Bitterroot Elementary School, we collected, there was a form that we staff filled out when there was a major behavioral referral, so a significant issue. And a lot of them the staff handled, but it's still a significant major behavior. At March, when we closed down the school, I had 497 major behavior referrals.
Wow.
And so as an administrator, you break that out throughout 180 days, it's a busy time.
Yeah.
So as an administrator, my ability to go in and support and observe staff, to just go out at recess time and work in the lunchroom, when you have 8 kids sitting outside the office because of behavioral concerns, it makes it tricky. And so from an administrative standpoint, if we can get some of that taken care of, I can do some of those other duties that I really signed on for, that I want to do, and work with kiddos. And then also you're looking at supporting your staff. When those behaviors are happening in class, teachers can't teach.
Sure.
And so it's not just impacting the student that's having the behavioral issue, but it's impacting those other kids in the class too. So our ultimate focus is we get enough supports in place where we see an academic impact on this. So kids feel safe and they feel loved, and they come in and we know what to do when they're having a difficult day, and they can have some supports in place. So then academically, we have to take care of the behavior before we take care of the academics.
Sure.
And so make sure that they're ready for that social emotional component, and then move on to the academics. And we should see a bump in scores, hopefully.
Yeah.
Like, that's wood, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. What has been some of the tougher issues of getting the program up and running? And then I promise I'll ask you a more uplifting question after you talk about after you talk about what's been hard. I'll ask you what's been easy.
Just getting the grant started. So in theory, we were supposed to start this grant back in September, and funding didn't come through, and organizational pieces. And when you get funding that comes through federal monies and then filtered through the state, there's some paperwork and red tape and correspondence that needs to happen. So we really didn't get going until January. So we're a little bit behind on that.
Yeah.
And we'd much rather start sooner than later. But we've got the ball rolling now, and that was a bit of a barrier, but those coaches are hired now. We've met with them. Robin Cormier, a former specialist for the district who's now working at MSUB in their counseling program, is helping do some training. And so we feel like we're getting a little traction now.
All right. So on the flip side of that, having been an administrator, having to deal with grants probably before, having to deal with money and all that kind of stuff, what has gone better than you maybe expected it to when you jumped into this program?
I cannot speak highly enough of the people that we have in place. Robin coming in and helping out, Amity coordinating everything. Susan Plath, the grant writer, is just exceptional. Kim Anthony, her leadership and direction. Superintendent Upham, the support that comes there. Phenomenal. And then we hired 3 incredible people that are going to be out in the buildings coaching everybody. The people aspect is the most powerful piece, and it's the piece I really feel best about. These are awesome people that are going to go out into our schools, and we know how incredible our teachers are. So for them to get some support, it's really uplifting to think about that.
All right, very good. So given that it's a grant and given that there's federal money tied to it, there's got to be paperwork that comes out on the backside too.
Oh baby.
What do you need to report? What outcomes are they going to be looking for? Or not? Not that it has to be this outcome, but what are the things they're going to be looking for on the back end? What is your reporting aspect, and what are the type of things that are going to have to come out of that that you're going to have to report back and say, this is how we use the grant money, and here's what came back out of it.
There's pages and pages and pages of details that we need, but ultimately we need to show that we're providing supports and we've got data that backs that up. So any type of training that we do, that needs to be documented. Any type of referral to the mental health community, we need to document that because that's an ultimate goal of this. And then just collecting data on those kiddos. Tier 3 kiddos particularly, we're looking at new data system, putting that in place, and then tracking those behaviors. And ultimately, we want those numbers to go down. And that's something that needs to be reflective of our work that we'll have to report as well.
Sure. So what is the duration of the grant? How long will you guys have access to funding for this?
At the end of this, we've got 4 more years to get done, which is pretty typical for any system to get in place. It takes about 3 to 5 years. So.
Yeah. Is this something, I know you guys weren't selected in the first funding go around. Was that just a year ago or
5?
It was 5 years ago.
Yep.
So was there anything that you could lean on for those schools that were part of round number 1 to say, hey, this worked pretty well, and hey, this year this is not going to work. Trust me, we tried it and it's not going to work. Was some of that information available to you guys as you're getting this grant up and running? Yeah,
and still is. So weekly, Amity, and I try and join, meets with our state support, and Dillon and Rocky Boy are the 2 other districts that are involved in this grant. And so there's a sharing time on that. And so we get some collaborative effort. And then once a month, there's a state group that gets together virtually. And Kalispell and Butte and Browning were involved. And they have folks that are involved in that meeting as well. And so we're learning from some of that. Plus the people in the state know, some of the mistakes that were made and some of the things that really worked well. And so we are leaning on that and getting some ideas and support on what to do and what not to do. Sure. And then do they have any sort of idea on the back end? Okay, yes, you're going to implement these things. We're going to see how they're going to work. We're going to do data and that kind of stuff. But is there kind of an expectation that after 5 years, this program will at least stay in place in some form or another? Again, we're here to learn something and do something new. So it may not look today what it looked like 5 years ago, but an expectation that we're building this program so that this program is in place moving forward in whatever effective capacity that it can move forward. I think the goal of any grant is sustainability, right?
Yeah.
After this money is gone, how are we going to make sure this continues and is successful? We're well aware of that. One of my goals is my position should not even be necessary, right? That's how we know a good system is in place already. So the grant I worked on 17 years ago had to do with integrating technology. And you think about 17 years ago, there was a shift in how technology was being used, and it wasn't as common and intuitive as it is now. And we are learning how do we integrate technology in the classroom just as a tool. We had myself and then the high schools were able to hire some technology integration people within the high schools themselves. And then at the end of the grant, the district said, wow, this is such important stuff. We need to find money for this.
Yeah.
And those integration specialists that started way back then, we still have those positions in the district now and know the value of them. That's my ultimate goal. In 4 years from now, if we talk, I want to be able to say, hey, Shoots, guess what? Those people, we recognize the value, and we need to make this sustainable, and it's happening.
Sure. If you could gaze into your crystal ball, what do you see happening over the next 4 years? I'm sure there's some things that you expect to happen, some successes you expect to happen. How do you kind of see this evolving over the next number of years?
That tiered system that I spoke of earlier is just really critical. So we have to make sure that we are not jumping ahead of ourselves. The Tier 1 supports in place. We have teams at every school. They're familiar with problem solving. The coaches are in. They're building relationships. So we've got that foundational piece. And then we can start moving on to those Tier 2 pieces. What are some supports we can put in place? What are the people that we need to really get that? How can we implement those effectively? And ultimately, we're going to focus on those Tier 3 kids, the kids that need the most and most intensive support. And so really making sure that we've got supports for those kiddos. And then the ultimate goal is, regardless of what school that you walk into, you can see these systems in place. The kids can go into any of those schools. The staff can go into any of those schools, be familiar with the systems, and see a true network of systems are working to really benefit staff and kids.
Sure. All right. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for coming down and visiting with us today about the grant. Sounds super interesting. Sounds like you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, so thank you for all you're doing to really implement this in Billings Public Schools. Everyone hopes it's going to be successful, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right.